The weight of the keys in my palm felt wrong, foreign somehow. I stared at the small brass collection. Front door, back office, supply room. All the access points to Hartwell Custom Furniture, the business my grandfather had started, my father had built, and that I had poured my heart into for the last 8 years. Even as Dad placed them in my hand with a wink and whispered, "Don't worry, Emma, I've got a plan." I couldn't stop the tears threatening to spill. 3 days earlier, I'd watched him sign over 75% ownership to my brother Chase, the golden child, who'd spent the last decade bouncing between failed startups in Silicon Valley, while I'd worked 60-hour weeks learning every aspect of our family's legacy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The furniture workshop had been my second home since childhood. While other kids spent summers at pool parties, I was learning how to sand cherry wood to a perfect finish, how to recognize quality grain with just a touch, how to calculate material costs while leaving room for profit. Dad had always praised my dedication, calling me his little apprentice, the one who truly understood the soul of Hartwell Custom Furniture. Yet somehow, when retirement loomed, it was Chase who swooped in with his MBA buzzwords and promises of modernization and digital transformation that convinced our father to hand over controlling interest. "You've always been the responsible one, Emma," Dad had explained as I sat stunned in his office, the ownership papers freshly signed. "Chase needs this opportunity to prove himself. He has the business education, the connections to take Hartwell into the future. You're already established here. Everyone knows your value." The familiar refrain echoed in my ears. Emma, the reliable one. Emma, the responsible one. Emma, who didn't need the same opportunities because she was already successful enough. I'd nodded numbly, years of being the agreeable daughter keeping me silent even as rage bubbled beneath my calm exterior. At 32, I was the production manager who kept the workshop running, who knew every client by name, who had expanded our customer base by 40% through sheer dedication and relationship building. Chase, at 35, hadn't set foot in the workshop for more than a holiday visit in over 12 years. My brother had arrived the next day wearing a tailored suit that probably cost more than our monthly utility bill, armed with a sleek presentation about unlocking synergies and disrupting the artisanal furniture space. He'd barely acknowledged the master craftspeople who had taught me everything I knew, barely glanced at the in-progress dining table I'd been designing for weeks for the mayor's residence. Instead, he'd immediately commandeered Dad's office, installing a massive monitor and talking loudly on speakerphone about investors and expansion capital. It was Lucas, our head woodworker and my mentor since I was 15, who first caught me crying in the lumber storage area. With his weathered hands and quiet wisdom, he'd sat beside me on a stack of oak planks, the scent of sawdust thick around us. "Your daddy ain't a fool, Emma," he'd said softly, his southern drawl more pronounced when we were alone. "I've known Richard Hartwell for 30 years. He sees more than he says." "Then why would he do this?" I'd whispered, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. "Everything I've worked for, just handed to Chase because he has an MBA and talks a good game." Lucas had shrugged, running calloused fingers along the grain of nearby maple. "Sometimes people need to learn lessons the hard way, and sometimes plans are being made that ain't obvious on the surface." I hadn't understood then what Lucas was hinting at. It was only when Dad pressed those keys into my palm, his eyes twinkling with that familiar look of mischief, that I began to wonder if there was more happening than a simple case of family favoritism. My apartment felt especially empty that evening as I scrolled mindlessly through social media, trying to distract myself from the hollow ache in my chest. Chase had already posted professional photos of himself in front of our workshop, captioned with something about taking the family legacy to the next level. The comments were filled with congratulations and flame emojis from friends who'd never stepped foot in Savannah, Georgia, let alone understood what Hartwell Custom Furniture Meant to our community, to our family, to me. My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend Olivia. Wine emergency at my place, no excuses. 20 minutes later, I was curled up on Olivia's sofa, glass in hand, pouring out the whole story. Unlike most people in my life, Olivia had never been impressed by Chase's charm or credentials. As the owner of a successful local bakery, she understood the blood and sweat equity that went into building something real. So Chase swoops in, waves his MBA around, and suddenly gets controlling interest in a business he knows nothing about? Olivia's incredulous tone validated the unfairness I'd been feeling. That's beyond ridiculous, Emma. It's your life's work. Apparently, my life's work doesn't matter as much as Chase's potential, I replied, the bitterness I'd been suppressing finally seeping into my voice. Dad called it the best of both worlds, Chase's business acumen with my production expertise. I took a deep swallow of wine. As if I haven't been handling the business side of my department for years. As if I don't understand profit margins and client acquisition. Olivia's eyes narrowed. And you just accepted this? The Emma I know would fight. Her words stung precisely because they were true. I'd spent a lifetime being the agreeable daughter, the team player, the one who made things work rather than causing waves. When had that become a weakness rather than a strength? Dad said he has a plan, I admitted, staring into my wine glass. Right before he gave me my copies of the workshop keys, he winked and whispered that I shouldn't worry. A plan? Olivia straightened. Like what? I have no idea. Maybe he's just trying to make me feel better about getting sidelined in my own family business. Olivia set down her glass with purpose. Or maybe there's something else happening that you don't know about yet. She reached for her laptop. Tell me exactly what the ownership arrangement looks like now. Chase gets 75% of the business, I get 15%, and Dad keeps 10% as a consulting stake until he fully retires next year. And what about the building itself? The property? I frowned, realizing I hadn't thought to ask about that. I'm not sure. I assumed it was part of the business assets. You need to find out, Olivia said, already typing. And you need to look at every document your dad and brother signed. There's got to be more to this story. For the first time since the bombshell had dropped, I felt a flicker of something other than despair. Curiosity, maybe, or the faintest spark of hope. What if Dad really did have something up his sleeve? What if this wasn't the end of my role? At Hartwell, but some kind of beginning I couldn't yet see? The next morning, I arrived at the workshop earlier than usual, determined to maintain my normal routine despite the seismic shift in my professional standing. The familiar sense of wood oil and sawdust embraced me as I unlocked the front door, the building quiet and still in the pre-dawn light. This had always been my favorite time at Hartwell, the peaceful moments before the day's demands began, when I could walk the floor and connect with the pieces in progress, running my fingers along smooth surfaces that had once been rough lumber. I made coffee in the small kitchenette and carried my mug to Dad's, now Chase's, office. The door was unlocked, and I slipped inside, taking in the changes already evident after just one day. Chase had removed most of Dad's personal touches, the family photos, the small wooden carvings from satisfied clients, the worn leather chair where Dad had sketched countless designs. In their place stood sleek, modern furniture that looked utterly out of place against the workshop's century-old brick walls. Impulsively, I sat at the desk and opened the computer. Chase had already changed the password, of course. I sighed and leaned back, my gaze traveling to the row of filing cabinets along the wall. Dad had always been methodical about documentation, insisting on paper copies of everything important despite Chase's frequent lectures about digital transformation. The property deed would be in there somewhere, along with the official ownership transfer documents. I rose and began searching through the meticulously labeled files, surprised to find many of them already emptied, their contents presumably scanned and discarded by my efficiency-minded brother. Looking for something specific? I jumped at, The sound of Dad's voice, nearly dropping the folder in my hand. He stood in the doorway, eyes twinkling with that same mysterious look he'd given me yesterday when pressing the keys into my palm. "Just trying to understand what's happening," I admitted, not bothering to hide my actions. "There's a lot you didn't explain about this transition." Dad nodded, closing the office door behind him. "Some things are better shown than told, Emma." He gestured to the chair I'd vacated. "Sit down. There are a few matters we should discuss before your brother arrives." I obeyed, watching as Dad pulled a key from his pocket and unlocked the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet, a drawer I'd never seen opened before. He withdrew a thick blue folder and placed it on the desk between us. "I want you to understand something important," he said, his voice unusually serious. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Hartwell Custom Furniture is more than just a business to me. It's our family's legacy, yes, but it's also a living entity that deserves the right stewardship. He tapped the folder. "I've been planning my succession for a long time, Emma. Much longer than you might think. By giving Chase controlling interest, I couldn't keep the hurt from my voice. By creating a situation that will reveal the truth about both my children." Dad opened the folder, revealing what looked like legal documents. Chase has been asking for his rightful place in the family business for years, always with grand plans and promises, always with that certainty that he knows better than those of us who've been doing the actual work. I nodded, remembering the condescending way Chase had spoken about outdated business models during his last holiday visit. "I could have simply declined," Dad continued, "but that would have only fueled his resentment and his conviction that I was unfairly favoring you. Instead, I chose a different path." He slid a document toward me. "This is the property deed for the workshop and showroom. As of last month, it's no longer owned by Hartwell Custom Furniture, Inc. It's owned by a separate entity, Hartwell Heritage Properties, LLC. I scanned the document, my confusion growing. "I don't understand." "Hartwell Heritage Properties has one owner," Dad said quietly. "You." The words didn't register at first. I read the deed again, noting my name listed as the sole member of the LLC. "You transferred the property to me before giving Chase the business?" Dad's smile was small but satisfied. "The business Chase now controls has a 10-year lease agreement with your property company. The terms are quite favorable for the first 3 years, about 40% below market rate. After that, the rent adjusts to market value, with you having sole discretion over renewals." I struggled to comprehend what this meant. "So Chase owns the business, but I own the building it operates in?" "Precisely. And there's more." Dad pulled out another document. "The business bank accounts that Chase now controls contain operating capital for approximately 6 months. The bulk of the company's liquid assets, about $2.3 million, were transferred to Hartwell Heritage Properties as a facility improvement fund last month." My jaw dropped. "Does Chase know about any of this?" "He knows there's a lease agreement, though I doubt he's read the details yet. He was too excited about getting controlling interest to ask many questions." Dad's expression grew serious again. "What he doesn't know is that I've structured his 75% ownership with a performance clause. If the business fails to maintain profitability for 2 consecutive quarters, or if he attempts to relocate the business from your property without board approval, his shares convert to non-voting stock. And the board is you, me, and Lucas, who holds a 1% special interest specifically for voting purposes." I sat back, stunned by the intricacy of what Dad had orchestrated. "You set him up to fail." Dad shook his head firmly. "No, Emma. I set him up to prove himself, one way or another. If Chase is truly the business genius he claims to be, if his ideas for modernization have merit, then Hartwell will thrive under his leadership and everyone wins. But if he's all talk and no substance, then control reverts to us, I finished, beginning to understand the elegant trap Dad had constructed. To you, primarily, Dad corrected. My 10% converts to you as well in that scenario. I'm retiring either way. I just want to ensure the business ends up in the right hands. He reached across the desk to squeeze my hand. Your hands, Emma. The hands that have been building and creating alongside me for the past 8 years while your brother was chasing quick success elsewhere. Emotions welled up, relief, vindication, and a new anxiety about what would happen when Chase discovered this arrangement. He's going to be furious. Perhaps, Dad acknowledged. Or perhaps this will be the push he needs to finally grow up and contribute something meaningful. Either way, Hartwell's future is secure. He gathered the documents and returned them to the blue folder. This is yours now. Keep it somewhere safe, preferably not here in the building. As if summoned by our conversation, the front door chimed, announcing Chase's arrival. Dad winked at me. Not a word about this yet. Let's see what your brother does with the opportunity he thinks he's been given. I nodded, tucking the folder into my bag, just as Chase's voice called out. Anyone here? We've got a business to revolutionize! Dad rose, squeezing my shoulder as he passed. Trust the process, Emma, and trust yourself. He paused at the door, adding quietly, By the way, there's a meeting scheduled with our biggest client, Savannah Historic Hotels, next week. Chase doesn't know about it yet. Might be interesting to see how he handles that. As Dad left to greet Chase, I remained seated, processing everything I'd just learned. For years, I'd interpreted Dad's even-keeled nature as passive, his fairness, as sometimes coming at my expense. Now, I realized he'd been playing a much longer game than I'd given him credit for, observing, evaluating, and quietly ensuring that the family legacy would ultimately be protected. I thought about all the times I'd swallowed my frustration when Chase had dismissed my contributions, all the holidays where he'd dominated conversations with tales of his business ventures while my work at Hartwell was taken for granted. The scales had always seemed tipped in his favor, until now. The revelation of Dad's secret backup plan didn't immediately erase the hurt of being passed over, but it transformed my understanding of what was happening. This wasn't an ending, but a test, for both Chase and me. Could he rise to the occasion and prove himself worthy of the trust placed in him? And could I find the strength to stand my ground and protect what I'd helped build, even if it meant confronting the brother who'd always overshadowed me? As Chase's voice grew louder in the hallway, outlining his vision to Dad with the same rehearsed enthusiasm he'd used in countless pitch meetings, I straightened my shoulders and prepared to face the day ahead. The keys Dad had given me felt different in my pocket now, not symbols of what I'd lost, but reminders of what was still mine to protect. For the first time since Chase had returned to claim his rightful place, I felt something like optimism. Whatever happened next, I wouldn't be facing it as the overlooked daughter or the taken-for-granted employee. I was Emma Hartwell, owner of Hartwell Heritage Properties, keeper of the true heart of our family's legacy. And I was finally ready to claim my place. The next week unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance, with Chase and me circling each other in the workshop. Every morning, he arrived later than the day before, always on his phone, always with that distracted air of someone handling bigger things than mere furniture production. Every evening I stayed later, checking the work orders, reassuring our craftspeople, and documenting every decision my brother made, or more often failed to make. On Wednesday, Lucas cornered me in the finishing room where I was applying a second coat of Danish oil to a walnut credenza. His weathered face creased with concern as he leaned against my workbench. Your brother's been asking questions about cash reserves, he said quietly. Wanted to know where the bulk of the operating capital is kept. I focused on the smooth, rhythmic motion of my polishing cloth, careful to maintain an even pressure. What did you tell him? That as head craftsman, I know wood, not money. Lucas snorted. Redirected him to accounting, where I suspect he'll get a similar answer. He paused, studying my face. "You know something about this, don't you?" I hesitated. Dad had asked for discretion, but Lucas was practically family. And according to what Dad had shown me, he was now officially part of our corporate governance. Let's just say Dad was more strategic about this transition than Chase realizes. Lucas's mouth twitched. "Figured as much. Richard Hartwell never does anything without at least 3 layers of planning." He straightened up. "Speaking of planning, that big hotel chain meeting is tomorrow. Your brother found out this morning, and he's been in a state ever since. Keeps asking about previous contracts and pricing models." Savannah Historic Hotels was our largest client, responsible for nearly 30% of our annual revenue. They had been working exclusively with Hartwell for their custom furniture needs since before I was born, and our latest commission, a complete refurnishing of their flagship property, had been in the works for months. "Did he ask you about the meeting?" I said, setting down my polishing cloth. "Nope," asked Joanna. "Lucas named our receptionist. Not the design team, not you. Tells you everything you need to know." It did indeed. Chase was scrambling, out of his depth but too proud, to seek help from the person who knew the client best, me. I'd been handling the Savannah Historic Hotels account personally for 3 years, building a relationship with their head of operations and design team. They trusted Hartwell because they trusted me. I checked my watch. I should finish this. Peace and head home. Tomorrow will be interesting. Lucas nodded, then hesitated. "Emma, be careful. Your brother's the type who gets dangerous when cornered. Don't underestimate what he might do if he feels threatened." His warning stayed with me as I drove home that evening. Chase and I had never been close. The 3-year age gap and his early departure for business school had seen to that. But there had been a time when we'd at least been friendly. I remembered him teaching me to ride a bike, helping with math homework during his rare visits home from college. When had that changed? When had competition replaced connection? I pulled into my apartment complex, still lost in thought, nearly missing the figure sitting on the steps to my building. It took me a moment to recognize Diane, my father's executive assistant for the past 15 years, and the closest thing I had to a mother figure since Mom died when I was 12. "Diane? Is everything okay?" I hurried toward her, concerns flooding my mind. Had something happened to Dad? She stood, brushing off her tailored slacks. "Everything's fine, honey. Your father sent me." She held up a thumb drive. "He thought you might need this for tomorrow's meeting." Relief washed over me, followed by confusion. "What is it?" "The complete presentation for Savannah Historic Hotels, including the revised pricing structure you and your father worked out last month." She handed me the drive. "Richard said Chase has been looking for this information but hasn't thought to ask the right people." I turned the small device over in my hand. "Dad's setting him up to fail," I murmured, more to myself than to Diane. Her expression remained carefully neutral. "Your father believes people reveal their true character under pressure. If Chase is what Hartwell needs, he'll rise to the occasion. And if he's not?" Diane's professional mask slipped, just slightly. "Then the company will be in better hands. Your hands, Emma." She started toward her car, then paused. "Oh, and one more thing. Your father suggested you arrive 15 minutes late to tomorrow's meeting. Just enough time for Chase to show his capabilities." I stood in the growing dusk, the thumb drive heavy in my palm, torn between loyalty to my family and increasingly complicated feelings about my father's methods. Was this justice or manipulation? Was I complicit in setting my own brother up for failure? Or was I simply allowing him to reveal his true colors? Sleep eluded me that night as I tossed between conflicting impulses. Part of me wanted to call Chase, to warn him about what was coming, to offer the presentation materials that would help him succeed tomorrow. That's what the dutiful sister, the team player, would do. But another part, a growing part, remembered. Years of dismissal, of Chase belittling my cute little woodworking hobby while I poured my soul into the family business. Why should I rescue him now, when he'd never shown the slightest interest in the actual work that kept Hartwell thriving? Morning arrived with no resolution to my moral dilemma. I dressed with particular care, selecting a forest green blazer over a cream silk blouse, professional but approachable, exactly the aesthetic that appealed to our traditional yet design-conscious client. I packed the thumb drive in my bag, still uncertain whether I would use it. Following Diane's suggestion, I timed my arrival at the showroom for precisely 15 minutes after the scheduled start of the meeting. The familiar bell chimed as I entered, the sound echoing in what appeared to be an empty showroom floor. I frowned. The Savannah Historic Hotels team was never late. From the conference room down the hall, I heard raised voices. Setting down. My bag, I moved quickly toward the sound, my heels clicking against the polished concrete floors. Through the glass wall of the meeting room, I could see 6 people seated around our reclaimed oak conference table. The hotel's CEO, their head of operations, 2 designers, my brother, and my father. The atmosphere was visibly tense, with Chase gesturing emphatically while the clients exchanged glances. I took a deep breath and pushed open the door. All heads turned toward me. "Emma!" Thomas Albright, the hotel's CEO, rose immediately. "Thank goodness. Perhaps you can help clear up this confusion." Chase's face was flushed, a combination of anger and embarrassment that I recognized from childhood confrontations. Dad sat quietly at the far end of the table, his expression revealing nothing. "I apologize for being late," I said smoothly. "Traffic was unexpectedly heavy this morning. What confusion can I help with?" Thomas gestured to a series of renderings, spread across the table. Preliminary designs I'd worked on for weeks before Chase's arrival. "Your brother seems to think these approved designs can be manufactured for 40% less if we switch to imported materials and outsourced labor. We've been trying to explain our commitment to local craftsmanship and authentic materials, which was the foundation of our agreement with Hartwell." I glanced at Chase, who seemed to be mentally calculating escape routes. Clearly, he'd attempted to boost profit margins by fundamentally altering the very qualities that made our furniture desirable to clients like Savannah Historic Hotels. "There's been a misunderstanding," I said, setting my portfolio on the table. "Hartwell's commitment to local materials and in-house craftsmanship remains absolute. Perhaps in the transition, some of the core project parameters weren't properly communicated." I gave Chase the smallest opening for a dignified retreat, curious to see if he would take it. He didn't. "I'm the majority owner now," he said stiffly. "And I've done a complete analysis of our cost structure. The current production model is inefficient and outdated. The changes I've proposed would maintain aesthetic quality while significantly improving our margins and delivery timeline." Hotel's head designer Maria shook her head. "We're not interested in the appearance of quality, Mr. Hartwell. Our guests can tell the difference between furniture made with care by master craftspeople and mass-produced items designed to look expensive. That's why we chose your company." Chase opened his mouth to argue, but I intervened. "If I may," I said, pulling out my laptop and the thumb drive Diane had delivered. "I believe these are the final specifications and pricing we had discussed, including the sustainably harvested local woods and the custom joinery techniques unique to Hartwell." I connected my computer to the room's display system, bringing up the presentation I'd prepared weeks ago. For the next 40 minutes, I walked the clients through each element of the proposal: the materials, the craftsmanship, the timeline, and yes, the premium pricing that reflected the true value of what we offered. Throughout my presentation, Chase remained silently fuming, while Dad watched with that same inscrutable expression he'd worn when giving me the property documents. When I finished, Thomas nodded decisively. "This is exactly what we discussed, exactly what we want. Assuming these terms still stand, we're prepared to sign the contract today." All eyes turned to Chase, who was trapped. Reject the proposal I'd presented, and he'd lose a major client in his first week of leadership. Accept it, and he'd be tacitly admitting that his cost-cutting strategy had been misguided. After a long, tense moment, he forced a smile. Of course the terms stand. Emma has clearly been managing this relationship effectively. I'm still getting up to speed on some of our legacy accounts. The meeting concluded with handshakes and signatures, the clients visibly relieved. As they filed out, Thomas paused beside me. "We work with Hartwell because of people like you, Emma," he said quietly. "People who understand that true quality can't be outsourced or mass-produced. Don't let that change." With a pointed glance at Chase, he followed his team out. The conference room door had barely closed before Chase rounded on me. "What the hell was that? You completely undermined." "Me!" "I saved an account worth nearly a third of our annual revenue," I corrected, gathering my materials calmly. "An account that was about to walk out because you tried to fundamentally change what they were paying for. I'm trying to make this business profitable." "It already is profitable," Dad interjected, speaking for the first time since I'd entered. "Hartwell has been operating in the black for 27 consecutive years. Our margins may not match what Silicon Valley considers acceptable, but we're a furniture maker, not a tech startup." Chase turned his frustration toward our father. "You set me up. You knew I didn't have the presentation materials, knew I didn't understand the background of this account. I assumed the new majority owner would do his due diligence before meeting with our largest client," Dad replied evenly, "including consulting with the team member who has been managing the relationship for years." He nodded toward me. "You could have asked me," I added, unable to keep a hint of satisfaction from my voice. "I've been here every day, easily accessible." Chase's expression hardened. "This isn't over. I have controlling interest, and there are going to be changes around here. Real changes that bring this company into the modern era." He stormed out, leaving Dad and me alone in the conference room. A heavy silence settled between us. "Was that necessary?" I finally asked. "Letting him fumble like that in front of our biggest client?" Dad sighed, suddenly looking every one of his 68 years. Would he have listened if either of us had tried to prepare him beforehand? Would he have admitted he needed help? I knew the answer. Chase's pride had always been his weakness, his absolute certainty in his own judgment, even in areas where he had no experience. Besides, Dad continued, Thomas and his team were never going to accept those changes. Better they see the truth. Now, with us here to correct course, than after Chase had already begun dismantling what makes Hartwell special. He was right, but a knot of uneasiness remained in my stomach. It feels wrong, letting him make mistakes that affect everyone who works here, everyone who depends on Hartwell for their livelihood. Dad rose, gathering his notes. The measure of leadership isn't avoiding mistakes, Emma. It's how quickly you recognize them and what you learn from them. Your brother has been handed opportunity after opportunity without earning them. Perhaps it's time he faced some actual consequences. That afternoon, the workshop hummed with tension. Word of the morning's confrontation had spread quickly among our staff of 22, many of whom had been with Hartwell for decades. They moved between workstations with unusual quietness, exchanging glances when Chase emerged from his office to pace the floor, making pointed comments about inefficiencies and outdated processes loud enough for everyone to hear. I focused on my work, applying myself to the final details of a custom dining table that had been commissioned for a local restaurant. Woodworking had always been my refuge, the place where problems became manageable, where patience and precision yielded tangible results. With each careful stroke of the finish, I felt my anxiety about the morning's events recede slightly. "He's looking for the financial records," Lucas murmured as he passed behind me, pretending to inspect my work. "Asking Karen about banking access and investment accounts." Karen was our accountant, a meticulous woman who had worked alongside Dad for 15 years. If anyone knew about the transfer of assets to Hartwell Heritage Properties, it would be her. But she was also fiercely loyal to Dad and to the company's traditions. "Has she told him anything?" I asked, continuing my methodical application of Finnish. "Only that your father reorganized some accounts recently and she's still sorting through the changes." Lucas glanced toward the offices. "She's stalling him, but he's getting impatient. Mentioned something about bringing in his own financial team to audit the books next week." The knot in my stomach tightened. Chase was no fool, despite his blind spots. He would eventually discover the property arrangement and the missing capital. What would happen then? At 5 o'clock, most of the staff filed out, leaving only me, Lucas, and 2 apprentices who were completing time-sensitive projects. Chase had disappeared into his office after another tense exchange with Karen, the door firmly closed against interruptions. I was just cleaning my brushes when Olivia appeared in the workshop doorway, a bakery box in her hands. "Thought you might need reinforcements," she said, lifting the box. Fresh cinnamon rolls, still warm. I managed a small smile, grateful for her intuition. "Is it that obvious I've had a rough day?" "Your completely fine but actually dying inside face has been perfected since childhood, but I can still read." "It?" She set the box on a clean workbench and perched beside it. "How'd the big meeting go?" I gave her the abbreviated version while the apprentices finished their work and headed out with cheerful goodnights. Lucas lingered, introducing himself to Olivia with old-fashioned courtesy before selecting a cinnamon roll with thanks. "Your brother's been making calls all afternoon," he informed me, lowering his voice. "Sounds like he's lining up outside investors. Kept mentioning capital injection and modernization funds." My pulse quickened. He can't bring in outside investors without board approval. At least, I thought he couldn't. I made a mental note to check the articles of incorporation Dad had included in the blue folder. "Maybe he doesn't know that yet," Olivia suggested, breaking a roll in half and passing part to me. "Or maybe he thinks he can convince your dad and you to go along with it." Lucas nodded, brushing cinnamon from his beard. "Either way, sounds like he's planning some kind of announcement soon. Heard him mention a company-wide meeting on Monday." With that ominous note, he bid us goodnight and headed out, leaving me alone with Olivia and my growing concerns. "We need to review those documents your dad gave you," Olivia said once we were alone. "Tonight. If Chase is making moves, you need to know exactly where you stand legally." She was right. I needed to understand the full extent of Dad's backup plan before Chase's next maneuver. We gathered our things, making sure all the workshop lights were off and doors secure before heading out. As we passed Chase's office, I noticed light still streaming from beneath the door, the murmur of his voice as he continued his phone calls. For a moment, I considered knocking, trying one more time to bridge the gulf between us. Perhaps if I explained Dad's concerns, shared my own knowledge of the business, we could find a way forward that didn't involve this escalating Cold War. But before I could act on the impulse, I heard my name mentioned, Chase's tone dismissive as he told, "Whoever was on the line, Emma's fine with the production floor, but she has no vision for the business. Once I secure additional investment, I'll bring in a real management team." The familiar sting of his dismissal hardened my resolve. I had spent 8 years proving myself, learning every aspect of Hartwell while Chase bounced between trendy startups. I had earned my place through dedication and skill, not entitlement. If he couldn't see my value, couldn't be bothered to even consult me before making plans that affected the company we both supposedly cared about, then perhaps Dad was right. Perhaps Chase needed to learn his lesson the hard way. Olivia's apartment became our war room that evening, the blue folder spread across her dining table alongside Thai takeout and a bottle of wine. Together, we pored over every document, with me explaining what I understood, and Olivia applying her business owner's perspective to fill in the gaps. "Your dad is either a genius or slightly devious," she said, examining the property lease agreement. "This gives you incredible leverage. After the initial 3-year period, You could essentially double the rent if you wanted to. I wouldn't do that, I protested. It would hurt the business. But you could, Olivia pointed out. And more importantly, Chase needs to understand that you could. It changes the power dynamic entirely. We moved on to the articles of incorporation, confirming my memory that major changes, including bringing in outside investors above a certain threshold, required board approval. With the board consisting of Dad, Lucas, and me, Chase would need at least one of us to side with him. What about this? Olivia tapped a clause in the performance agreement. If the business fails to maintain profitability for 2 consecutive quarters, Chase's voting shares convert to non-voting stock. But what counts as failing to maintain profitability? Is there a specific target? I scanned the document, finding the referenced section. It says as compared to the average quarterly profit of the previous fiscal year. So if profits drop below what we averaged last year, for 2 quarters in a row, Chase loses voting control. And who determines the profit calculations? Who certifies them? An independent accountant selected by the board, I read, the implications becoming clear. If Chase starts making dramatic changes, outsourcing production, switching to cheaper materials, moving away from our core business model, it could easily impact profitability, at least in the short term. Olivia sat back, twirling her wine glass thoughtfully. So, your dad created a system where Chase has to either A, maintain the business as it currently operates, which means essentially following your guidance since you know how it works, or risk losing control if his changes negatively impact the bottom line. Put that way, it seemed both elegant and somewhat ruthless. I'm not sure how I feel about this, I admitted. It's like Dad set up a test Chase doesn't know he's taking. Or, Olivia countered, he gave Chase exactly what he's been asking for, a chance to prove he can run the family business better than you can. If Chase succeeds, great. The business thrives under new leadership. If he fails, the consequences are built into the agreement he signed, clear as day. She had a point. Chase had signed these documents, presumably without reading the fine print, too eager to get his hands on what he thought was control. His carelessness, his assumption that he deserved leadership without earning it, had led him into a trap of his own making. As the evening wore on, our review of the documents revealed further layers to Dad's planning. The property company, my company, had first right of refusal on any sale of Hartwell Custom Furniture. The Facility Improvement Fund could be used not just for property upgrades, but also, under certain conditions, for business stabilization if the tenant company faced financial distress. There was even a provision allowing for the property company to provide secured loans to the furniture business if approved by both boards. Dad had essentially created a safety net for Hartwell that I controlled, separate from Chase's influence. The question was, would I need to use it? My phone rang just as we were wrapping up our review. Dad's name flashed on the screen. I heard about Chase's investor calls, he said without preamble when I answered. Karen tells me he's scheduled meetings with 3 different investment groups next week. Can he actually bring in outside investors? I asked, though I already knew the answer from our document review. Not without board approval for any investment over $100,000 or any equity dilution. Dad paused. He's also been asking questions about the property ownership and the missing operating capital. I think things are about to accelerate faster than I anticipated. A chill ran through me. What should I do? Be prepared for Monday's meeting. I suspect Chase will make his move then, trying to present the investment as a fait accompli. When he does, Dad hesitated. When he does, it will be time for you to decide what kind of leader you want to be, Emma. Not just for Hartwell, but for yourself. After we hung up, I stared at the document spread before me. The framework of protection Dad had built suddenly feeling less like a safety net and more like a responsibility. He hadn't just been planning for Chase to fail. He'd been preparing me to step up in a way I'd never been pushed to before. "So," Olivia said, breaking into my thoughts, "what's the plan for Monday?" I gathered the documents, my mind racing with possibilities. "I'm not sure yet, but I think it's time I stopped reacting to Chase and started thinking 3 steps ahead, just like Dad taught me to do with furniture design." I managed a small smile. Every good craftsperson knows you have to anticipate how the materials will behave under pressure. And my brother, for all his business school credentials, was becoming increasingly predictable under pressure. The question was I ready to apply the pressure needed to protect what mattered most? Monday morning arrived with a sense of inevitability. I'd spent the weekend alternating between reviewing the legal documents, consulting with Olivia, and trying to anticipate Chase's next moves. After much deliberation, I'd decided on a cautious approach: observe first, react strategically, and above all, protect the workshop and the people who depended on it. The company-wide meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. before the normal workshop. Operations began. I arrived early at 7:30 to center myself in the quiet of the space I loved most. Running my hands along the smooth edges of a half-completed dining table, I drew strength from the familiar sense of wood oil and possibility. Lucas found me there, his leather apron already tied around his waist despite the early hour. "Big day," he said simply, setting a cup of coffee beside me. I nodded, grateful for his steady presence. "Chase has something planned. Dad thinks it involves outside investors. Would change the soul of this place," Lucas remarked, gazing around the workshop that had been his home for 3 decades. "Turn us into just another furniture factory, churning out pieces without heart." "I won't let that happen," I promised, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. Whatever he's planning, the heart of Hartwell stays intact. Lucas's weathered face creased in a rare smile. "Never doubted it." He hesitated, then added, "Your grandfather, your dad's father, faced something similar, you know. His brother wanted to modernize back in the 70s, mechanize everything to compete with the big manufacturers. Would have destroyed what made Hartwell special." I hadn't heard this story before. "What happened?" Alfred stood his ground, said some things are worth more than quick profits. The business weathered a rough patch, but when the mass produced, stuff started falling apart after a few years. Our reputation for quality brought customers back stronger than ever. Lucas set down his coffee cup with purpose. "History has a way of repeating itself. Good thing you've got more of Alfred in you than you realize." By 8:45, the workshop had filled with our entire staff. The craftspeople, the office team, the delivery drivers, the apprentices. 22 souls whose livelihoods were tied to Hartwell's success, whose skilled hands created the pieces that carried our family name. They gathered in small groups, voices hushed with speculation about the unusual meeting. Dad arrived at 5 minutes to 9, nodding to me briefly before taking a seat near the back. I noticed he carried a slim leather portfolio, unusual for him, as he typically relied on his remarkable memory rather than written notes. At precisely 9 Chase emerged from his office, followed by 3 people I didn't recognize, 2 men and a woman, all dressed in the sleek business attire that marked them as distinctly not from our world of sawdust and creativity. They stood slightly apart, observing the assembled staff with calculating eyes. "Good morning, everyone," Chase began, projecting confidence despite the tension visible in his shoulders. "Thank you for gathering on such short notice. As most of you know, I've recently assumed leadership of Hartwell Custom Furniture, and I'm excited to share my vision for our future." He gestured to the strangers. "I'd like to introduce Michael Devlin, Anita Torres, and James Whitfield from Meridian Venture Partners. They represent a group of investors who see tremendous potential in what we've built here." A murmur rippled through the assembled staff. Lucas caught my eye, his expression grim. "Hartwell has a proud legacy," Chase continued. but we've been operating with an outdated business model that limits our growth potential. With Meridian's investment, we can modernize our production process, expand our market reach, and increase profitability for everyone involved. The woman, Anita, stepped forward with practiced smoothness. We've been impressed by Hartwell's craftsmanship and brand recognition, she said. Our investment would allow for state-of-the-art equipment, expanded production facilities, and a digital marketing strategy to reach high-end clients nationwide. What exactly are you proposing? I asked, unable to remain silent any longer. Chase's smile tightened. Meridian is prepared to invest $2.5 million in exchange for a 30% stake in Hartwell. This would give us the capital to implement necessary upgrades while maintaining family control of the business. I did quick mental math. If Chase currently held 75% and was proposing to dilute that to approximately 52.5% with this new investment, my 15% would become roughly 10.5%, and Dad's 10% would fall to 7%. We would remain minority shareholders with even less influence than before. And what changes would this investment require? I pressed, aware of every employee watching this exchange. One of the men, Michael, I thought, answered. We'd implement a phased modernization plan. First, updating production equipment to increase output. Second, transitioning to a hybrid manufacturing model that combines your custom work with a line of standardized pieces that can be produced more efficiently. Third, exploring partnerships with overseas workshops for component parts. I felt Lucas stiffen beside me. Overseas workshops, he repeated flatly. You mean outsourcing the craftsmanship that defines Hartwell? Only for certain components, Michael clarified smoothly. The final assembly and finishing would still happen here, under the Hartwell name. With fewer craftspeople, I guessed, looking around at the worried faces of our team. Since these efficient methods would require less skilled labor. Chase stepped forward, clearly trying to regain control of the narrative. This is about growth, Emma. About securing Hartwell's future in a competitive marketplace. Yes, there would be changes, but change is necessary for survival. Is it? I countered. Quietly. We've been profitable for 27 consecutive years without compromising our values or our craftsmanship. Our clients come to us precisely because we don't mass produce or cut corners. The third visitor, James, cleared his throat. Ms. Hartwell, with respect, the high-end furniture market is evolving. Customers want the appearance of custom quality with faster delivery times and more competitive pricing. Our research indicates significant growth potential if Hartwell adapts to these changing demands, at the expense of what makes us Hartwell in the first place, I said. Dad stood then, his movement drawing all eyes. I believe there are some procedural matters to address before this discussion goes further. He opened his portfolio, withdrawing several documents. According to our articles of incorporation, any investment exceeding $100,000 or resulting in equity dilution requires board approval. Chase's expression flickered with irritation. The board consists of you, me, and Emma. As majority shareholder, my vote carries more weight. That's not how boards work, son, Dad corrected mildly. Each board member has an equal vote, regardless of their equity stake. Additionally, there's the matter of Lucas's special voting interest. The investors exchanged glances, clearly hearing this for the first time. Lucas, Anita repeated, confusion evident. Your head craftsman has a voting interest. 1%, Dad confirmed, with specific voting rights on matters affecting the core business model or equity structure. Chase's face had begun to redden. This is absurd. I'm the majority owner. Of the business, I interjected, stepping forward. But not of the property it occupies, nor of the significant capital reserves transferred before your acquisition of controlling interest. A stunned silence fell over the room. Chase stared at me, then at Dad, comprehension dawning in his eyes. What are you talking about? Dad handed the documents to Chase. Perhaps you should have reviewed these more carefully before signing. Hartwell Custom Furniture leases its facilities from Hartwell Heritage Properties, LLC, which is solely owned by Emma. Additionally, the bulk of the company's liquid assets were transferred to the property company as a facility improvement fund prior to the ownership transition. The investors were now watching with undisguised concern as Chase flipped through the papers, his expression darkening with each page. "This is a trick," he finally sputtered. "A manipulation to undermine my leadership." "It's a protective measure," Dad replied evenly, "to ensure that Hartwell's legacy and the livelihoods of everyone in this room aren't sacrificed for short-term profit. If your leadership proves beneficial for the company, these structures won't hinder you. If not..." He let the implication hang in the air. The woman from Meridian stepped closer to Chase, murmuring something in his ear. He shook his head vehemently, but she persisted, gesturing at the documents. "If you'll excuse us," Chase finally said tightly, "we need to review these developments in private." He stalked toward his office, the investors following with visible reluctance. As they left, a collective breath seemed to release throughout the workshop. Several employees approached Dad, asking questions in low voices about what this meant for their jobs, for the future. He reassured them calmly, his steady presence providing the same stability it always had. Lucas sidled up beside me. "That went about as well as a greenwood joint," he remarked dryly. I suppressed a smile at the woodworking metaphor for something destined to crack under pressure. "It's not over yet. Chase won't give up that easily." "No," Lucas agreed. But now he knows he's not holding all the cards. He studied my face. "Your move caught him off guard. He never expected you to speak up like that." The realization brought a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. My brother had so thoroughly underestimated me that he hadn't even considered I might pose a challenge to his plans. Had it always been that way? Had he simply never seen me clearly, too blinded by his own ambition to recognize mine? The rest of the morning passed in a fog of tension. Chase remained closeted with the investors, occasional raised voices filtering through the closed office door. The workshop operated at half speed, everyone too distracted by the morning's revelations to focus properly on their craftsmanship. Around noon, Dad found me in the design room, where I'd retreated to work on sketches for a commission that suddenly seemed far less important than the power struggle engulfing our family business. "You handled yourself well this morning," he said, settling into the chair across from my drafting table. "I followed your script," I pointed out. "Revealed the property arrangement just like we discussed." Dad shook his head. "There was no script, Emma. Only an opportunity for you to stand up for what you believe in, for what Hartwell stands for. You could have stayed silent, let me handle Chase and the investors, but you didn't." I set down my pencil, studying my father's face. For the first time, I noticed how tired he looked, the subtle sag of his shoulders beneath his perfectly pressed shirt. "You've been carrying this place a long time, haven't you?" A small smile ghosted across his face. "It's been my honor, but every craftsman knows when it's time to pass the tools to the next generation." He reached across the table, covering my hand with his. "I've always known it would be you, Emma. Never had a doubt, even when your brother was making his demands." "Then why give him controlling interest at all?" The question that had been burning inside me finally emerged. Why this elaborate test? Dad's expression grew contemplative. Chase needed to learn that leadership is earned, not entitled. And you? He squeezed my hand gently. You needed to learn that being agreeable isn't the same as being strong. That sometimes standing your ground, even against family, is the most loving thing you can do. Before I could respond, the design room door opened, revealing Chase. His face was drawn, his earlier bravado replaced by a tightly controlled anger. "The investors are leaving," he announced flatly. "They've withdrawn their offer, citing unforeseen complications in the corporate structure. His gaze fixed on me. "I hope you're satisfied. You just cost this company a major opportunity." Did I? I rose slowly, gathering my courage. Or did I protect it from being dismantled and diluted until it was no longer Hartwell? Chase's jaw tightened. "This business needs to evolve, Emma. It can't remain frozen in some nostalgic past just because you and Dad are afraid of change." "We're not afraid of change," I countered. "We're protective of what matters, the craftsmanship, the integrity, the people who make Hartwell what it is. There's a difference between evolution and abandonment." "Pretty words," Chase scoffed. "But sentiment doesn't pay the bills. How do you propose we grow without capital investment? How do we compete in a market that wants faster, cheaper furniture?" I considered his questions, recognizing the genuine concern beneath his hostility. Despite our differences, Chase was still my brother, still connected to our family legacy, however differently we interpreted it. "We don't," I said simply. "We don't compete on speed or price. We compete on quality, on uniqueness, on creating pieces that last generations rather than following trends." I moved around the drafting table, closing the distance between us. "There is capital available, Chase. The Facility Improvement Fund. That's now part of the property company. But it needs to be invested in enhancing what makes Hartwell special, not in erasing it." Dad watched our exchange silently, his expression somewhere between hope and resignation, as if uncertain whether his children could find common ground or were destined to remain divided. Chase paced the small room, frustration evident in every movement. "So what happens now? You control the property, the capital. Do you expect me to just surrender the business I legally own?" The question crystallized the moment into something pivotal. What did I want? Revenge for being overlooked? Control for its own sake? Or something more meaningful? Preservation of what Hartwell truly represented? "No," I said finally. "I expect you to run it, as Dad intended, but with respect for its history and in genuine partnership with the people who know it best." I paused, choosing my next words carefully, including me. His eyes narrowed suspiciously. "What are you proposing?" "A truce," I suggested. "No more unilateral decisions, no more surprise investor meetings. We work together. You bring your business expertise, I bring my knowledge of the craft and the clients. We find a path forward that honors what Hartwell has been while allowing it to grow into what it could be." Chase looked unconvinced. "And if I refuse? If I find other investors, ones who don't care about these complications?" "You've seen the documents," Dad interjected quietly. "You know the performance clause, the conversion of voting shares if profitability falls. You know the lease terms, the property arrangement." His voice softened. "This doesn't have to be adversarial, son. It can be an opportunity for both of you to learn from each other, to build something stronger together than either of you could, alone." A tense silence filled the room as Chase weighed his options. I could almost see the calculations running behind his eyes, the legal battles he might wage, the financial maneuvers he might attempt, balanced against the simpler path of cooperation. "I need time to think," he finally said, his voice stiff, with unresolved emotions. "This isn't what I signed up for." "Take the time," I offered. "The workshop will continue as it has. Nothing needs to change immediately." After Chase left, Dad released a long, slow breath. "He'll come around," he said, though whether he was trying to convince me or himself remained unclear. "He's stubborn, but he's not foolish. Eventually, he'll see that partnership is the only sensible way forward." I wasn't so certain. The look in Chase's eyes had been one of wounded pride, of thwarted ambition. Men with my brother's drive didn't simply accept limitations or compromise. They schemed, they maneuvered, they found ways to reassert control. "What if he doesn't?" I asked. "What if he decides to fight instead?" Dad stood, straightening his shoulders with visible effort. Then you'll need to be prepared for that fight, Emma. I've created the structure, laid the groundwork, but I can't be the one to defend it. That responsibility falls to you now. The weight of his words settled around me like a mantle. Not just the responsibility for a property company or a workshop, but for a legacy, for people's livelihoods, for the very soul of what our family had built. I'll be ready, I promised, surprising myself with the resolve in my voice. Dad smiled then, a genuine expression that lightened the years from his face. I know you will. You always have been. I just needed you to realize it too. The rest of the day passed in an uneasy calm. Chase remained sequestered in his office, the sounds of phone calls occasionally drifting through the closed door. The workshop slowly returned to its normal rhythm, craftspeople bending to their tasks with cautious optimism now that the immediate threat of outside investors had receded. Around 4 o'clock, Karen from accounting appeared at my workstation, her expression troubled. "Emma, can I speak with you privately?" she asked, voice lowered. I led her to the small conference room adjacent to the design studio, closing the door behind us. "What's wrong?" Karen twisted her hands nervously. "Your brother asked me to prepare financial projections based on some changes he's considering. Significant changes to our operations." She withdrew a folder from her bag, spreading several spreadsheets before me. "He wants to cut the workshop staff by 30% immediately, transition to partial machine manufacturing for standard pieces, and lease a separate facility outside of Savannah for volume production." My stomach dropped as I scanned the documents. Chase wasn't giving up. He was simply adjusting his strategy, planning to reshape Hartwell from within, using his authority as majority owner to implement the same changes the investors had proposed. "When does he want to start these changes?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "That's the thing," Karen replied, pointing to a timeline at the bottom of one spreadsheet. "He's scheduled an announcement for Friday, 3 days from now. He's already contacted a recruitment firm about hiring a new production manager." Her eyes met mine meaningfully. "Someone to replace you." The implications were clear. Chase intended to sideline me professionally while working around the property and capital constraints Dad had established. He was calling our bluff, daring us to invoke the performance clause and convert his shares while he systematically dismantled everything that made Hartwell special. "Thank you for showing me this," I said, gathering the spreadsheets. "I'll handle it from here." After Karen left, I sat alone in the conference room, staring at the clinical analysis of how Chase planned to transform our family's legacy into something unrecognizable. Rows of numbers represented craftspeople who would lose their jobs, generations of knowledge that would be discarded, a tradition of excellence sacrificed for efficiency. My phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "Workshop gathering at my place tonight, 7 p.m. Bring Lucas." I frowned at the cryptic message, then sent a quick reply. "What's happening?" Her response was immediate. "I've been talking to some people. Think I found a way forward. Trust me." Trust had become a complicated concept over the past week. Trust in my father's mysterious planning, trust in my own abilities, trust in the future of Hartwell itself. But Olivia had never steered me wrong, had stood beside me through every challenge since we were children sharing playground secrets. I texted back a simple, "Okay," and went to find Lucas, wondering what new development awaited us that evening, and whether it would be enough to counter the storm my brother was silently brewing. Olivia's bakery had closed hours ago, but the lights blazed from its windows as Lucas and I approached that evening. Through the glass, I could see several people gathered around the large communal table, where Olivia typically hosted bread-making classes. I recognized my father's silver hair, Karen from accounting, and to my surprise, Thomas Albright from Savannah Historic Hotels. "What is this?" Lucas murmured beside me, mirroring my confusion. "I have no idea," I admitted as we entered. The bell above the door announcing our arrival. Olivia rushed over immediately, her chef's apron dusted with flour despite the late hour. "You're here. Good. We've been waiting." She gestured to the assembled group. "I hope you don't mind, but I called in some reinforcements." As we approached the table, I took in the full gathering: Dad, Karen, Thomas, Maria, the hotel designer, 2 of our senior craftspeople besides Lucas, and our longtime attorney, Walter Freeman, who had handled Hartwell's legal affairs since before I was born. Various papers were spread across the table alongside Olivia's signature cinnamon rolls and a carafe of coffee. "What's going on?" I asked, looking from one face to another. Dad stood, his expression a mixture of pride and solemnity. "Olivia contacted me this afternoon. She thought it was time we coordinated our response to Chase's plans." "How did you—" I turned to Olivia. "Karen called me after she spoke with you," she explained unapologetically. "And I've been talking to Thomas about his concerns ever since. The investor meeting. One thing led to another, and—" She gestured to the assembled group. "We're here because we care about Hartwell," Thomas said, rising to shake my hand. "Not just as a vendor, but as a Savannah institution. What your brother is proposing would fundamentally change the business we've relied on for generations." Walter, the attorney, cleared his throat. "And potentially violate several contractual obligations to existing clients," he added, tapping a folder beside him. "Many of Hartwell's agreements specify handcrafted construction by master woodworkers, not machine manufacturing or overseas components." I sank into an empty chair, overwhelmed by the realization that all these people had mobilized on behalf of Hartwell, on behalf of me, without my even asking. I don't know what to say. "Say you're ready to fight for what's right," Lucas suggested, gruffly, taking the seat beside me. "Because that's why we're all here." Olivia placed a steaming mug of coffee before me. "We've been sharing information, trying to get a complete picture of what Chase is planning and what options we have to prevent it." Karen nodded, sliding a copy of the financial projections toward me. "I've been explaining the likely impact of his proposed cuts and changes. The numbers don't lie. Short term, profits might increase from reduced labor costs. But long term, we'd lose our competitive advantage in the high-end market." "Which is precisely what concerns us," Thomas confirmed. "We pay a premium for Hartwell furniture because of the craftsmanship, the local materials, the customization. If that changes, we'd have no reason not to use cheaper alternatives from larger manufacturers." Walter leaned forward, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "I've been reviewing the legal documents your father created, as well as Hartwell's articles of incorporation and existing client contracts. There are several potential approaches we could take to counter your brother's plans." I glanced at Dad, who had been uncharacteristically quiet. "And you? What do you think we should do?" He smiled slightly. "I think it's time for me to listen, rather than lead. This is your fight now, Emma." The weight of his words settled over me, along with the expectant gazes of everyone around the table. They were looking to me for direction, for leadership, in a way no one ever had before. The dutiful daughter, the reliable employee who followed others' visions, was being asked to cast a vision of her own. I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. "Before we discuss options, I need to be clear about something. This isn't about winning a power struggle with my brother or proving who's right. It's about preserving what makes Hartwell special: the craftsmanship, the tradition, the people. If there's a solution that accomplishes that while allowing Chase a meaningful role, that's what I want." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "After what he's planning, you'd still give him a place at the table?" "He's family," I said simply. "And despite everything, he does have business expertise that could benefit Hartwell if properly applied. I don't want to push him out. I want to redirect his energy towards strengthening what we have rather than replacing it." Thomas nodded approvingly. "Honorable intentions, but the practical question remains. How do we prevent the immediate damage?" "He's planning." Walter retrieved a document from his briefcase. There are several approaches. First, we could invoke the performance clause immediately, arguing that Chase's proposed changes would inevitably lead to the profitability decline specified in the agreement. This would convert his voting shares preemptively. That seems aggressive, I said hesitantly. And legally complex. It is, Walter agreed. A more straightforward approach would be to use the property leverage. As the landlord, Emma has certain rights regarding modifications to the building. Chase's plans would require significant alterations to accommodate machinery and different workflow patterns. Karen jumped in. There's also the financial angle. Chase doesn't realize that the operating accounts only contain enough for about 2 more months of normal operations. He's assuming there's more capital available than there actually is. Because the rest is in Hartwell Heritage Properties, I confirmed, thinking through the implications. He can't implement major changes without accessing those funds, which would require my approval as the property company's sole owner. Dad finally spoke up. There's another factor to consider. Most of our clients have relationships with specific craftspeople. If Lucas and the senior team were to indicate they wouldn't work under the new conditions, we'd walk, Lucas stated flatly. Every one of us. No disrespect intended, but what your brother's proposing isn't what we signed up for. We're artisans, not factory workers. The gravity of that declaration hung in the air. Without the master, craftspeople, Hartwell would lose not just skilled labor, but generations of accumulated knowledge and technique, the very essence of what distinguished our furniture. That's leverage, Olivia pointed out, but it's also mutually assured destruction. If the senior craftspeople leave, Hartwell might not recover, regardless of who's in charge. Thomas drummed his fingers on the table thoughtfully. What about a client coalition? If major clients like Savannah Historic Hotels made it clear that our contracts depend on maintaining the current production standards, Maria, the hotel designer, nodded enthusiastically. We could absolutely do that. Draft a joint letter, expressing our concerns. Maybe even request a meeting with Chase to explain directly why we value Hartwell's traditional methods. All of these are pressure points, Walter summarized. Ways to make Chase reconsider his approach. But ultimately, the most direct path would be a board vote against his proposals. With Richard, Emma, and Lucas voting as a block, Chase would be legally prevented from making these changes, regardless of his majority ownership. I considered all the options laid before me, each with its own advantages and risks. The board vote was cleanest legally, but would further antagonize Chase, deepening the family rift. The client coalition might persuade him without direct confrontation, but wouldn't provide the same legal certainty. The property and financial leverage were powerful, but felt manipulative. What if we combined approaches? I suggested slowly. Use the client coalition and craftspeople concerns to demonstrate the business case for preserving our methods, while making it clear that the board would vote against dramatic changes if necessary. Show Chase both the carrot and the stick. Walter nodded approvingly. A graduated response. Reasonable. But with a timeline, Lucas added. Your brother's planning his announcement for Friday. We need to act before then. I glanced at Dad, who had been watching the discussion with quiet attentiveness. What would you do? I asked softly. He considered for a moment. I would remember that Chase, for all his ambition and impatience, is still a businessman at heart. Appeal to that side of him, show him hard evidence that his approach would ultimately fail, not from obstruction, but from market realities. He smiled faintly. And I would remember that he's still my son, who despite everything, wants to prove himself worthy of the Hartwell name. Give him a path to do that without destroying what makes that name valuable. His wisdom, as always, cut to the heart of the matter. Chase needed to save face, to find a way forward that felt like success on his terms rather than capitulation. All right, I said decisively. Here's what we'll do. For the next 2 hours, we crafted a comprehensive strategy. Thomas and Maria, would draft a letter from key clients expressing concerns about potential changes to Hartwell's production methods, emphasizing the premium they paid specifically for traditional craftsmanship. Karen would prepare detailed financial projections showing the long-term revenue impact of losing high-end clientele compared to the short-term savings of Chase's proposed cuts. Lucas and the senior craftspeople would document the specialized techniques used in our furniture production, highlighting elements that couldn't be replicated by machinery or less experienced workers. Walter would prepare a memo outlining the board's legal authority to block major operational changes, as well as the performance clause implications. And I would compile it all into a presentation that offered Chase an alternative vision, one that incorporated his desire for growth and efficiency without sacrificing Hartwell's core identity. A path where he could still lead, still innovate, but in harmony with what already worked, rather than in opposition to it. "What about the property and capital leverage?" Olivia asked as we wrapped up. "That's your strongest position." I shook my head. "I'll keep those in reserve. If Chase sees this as primarily a power play, he'll dig in his heels out of pride. This needs to be about the business case first, about what's best for Hartwell's future." Dad's expression was one of unmistakable approval. "You've grown," he said simply as the meeting disbanded and people began gathering their materials. "Not just as a craftsperson, but as a leader." The compliment warmed me, but anxiety still churned beneath my determination. I just hope it's enough. Chase can be stubborn. "Wonder where he gets that from," Lucas muttered with a pointed look at Dad, lightening the moment. The next day was a blur of coordinated activity. Thomas delivered the client letter, bearing the signatures of 8 major Hartwell customers, collectively representing over 60% of our annual revenue. Karen completed her financial analysis, creating clear visual projections that even the most stubborn observer couldn't dismiss. Lucas and the craftspeople produced a detailed documentation of proprietary techniques, complete with photographs and material samples demonstrating the quality difference between handcrafted and machine-manufactured joints. By Wednesday evening, I had compiled everything into a comprehensive presentation, adding my own contribution, a hybrid model that preserved Hartwell's traditional craftsmanship for custom pieces while creating a separate, clearly branded line of mid-tier furniture that could incorporate some of the efficiency measures Chase wanted. This Hartwell Heritage line would serve as a bridge between our high-end custom work and more accessible products, opening new markets without cannibalizing our core business. "It's good," Olivia assessed, reviewing the presentation at my apartment that night. "Really good? Addresses his concerns while protecting what matters. Will he listen, though?" I sighed, closing my laptop. "Chase has never been good at hearing perspectives that challenge his own." Olivia topped off our wine glasses. "That's why this isn't just an emotional appeal. You've got hard numbers, client signatures, concrete evidence, and..." She hesitated. "You've got leverage you haven't even shown him yet. The property, the capital, the performance clause. If reason fails, power awaits." I grimaced at her phrasing. "I don't want it to come to that." "Neither do I," she assured me. "But it's good to know it's there if needed." Thursday morning, I arrived at the workshop earlier than usual, needing time to center myself before the confrontation ahead. To my surprise, the lights were already on, the scent of fresh coffee drifting from the small kitchenette. I found Lucas, at his workbench, meticulously fitting inlay pieces into a table he'd been crafting for weeks. "Couldn't sleep," he explained without looking up from his delicate work. "Figured I might as well be productive." I poured myself coffee and leaned against his bench, drawing comfort from the familiar rhythm of his movements. "Nervous about today?" He snorted softly. "Been through worse. Recessions, market shifts, design trends that made people think they didn't want real wood furniture." His weathered hands paused their work. "Hartwell survived it all because your grandfather. Then your father?" understood that quality endures when trends fade. He finally looked up at me. And now that understanding falls to you. And Chase, I added quietly. If I can make him see. Lucas shrugged. Maybe. Maybe not. Either way, the work continues. He gestured to the half-completed table. This piece will outlive all of us, stand in someone's home for generations. That's what matters, Emma. Not who gets credit or who makes decisions, but that the work itself endures. His perspective steadied me, reminding me that today's confrontation, however important, was just one moment in Hartwell's long history. A history that would continue long after the current tensions had faded into family lore. Chase arrived. At 9 o'clock sharp, earlier than his usual practice since taking over. He looked tired. The confident swagger of recent weeks diminished by whatever weight he was carrying. He nodded curtly as he passed me in the hallway, his expression unreadable. I gave him an hour to settle, to address whatever emails or calls demanded his attention, before knocking on his office door with my presentation materials in hand. "Not now, Emma," he called through the door. "I'm preparing for tomorrow's announcement." Instead of retreating as I might have done in the past, I turned the handle and entered anyway. "That's exactly why we need to talk now," I said calmly, closing the door behind me. "Before you make an announcement that can't be taken back." Chase looked up from his computer, irritation flashing across his features. "I told you!" "I know what you're planning," I interrupted, placing Karen's financial projections on his desk. "I know about the staff cuts, the machinery, the separate facility. I know you've contacted a recruitment firm to replace me." His expression tightened. "So you've been spying on me, going behind my back to undermine my leadership." "No," I corrected. "I've been gathering information about decisions that affect everyone who works here. Decisions you've been making without consulting the very people whose expertise you need." I placed the client letter beside the projections, including our most valuable customers. Chase glanced at the letter, his brow furrowing as he noted the letterhead and signatures. "What is this?" "A statement from clients representing over 60% of our annual revenue, making it clear that they choose Hartwell specifically for our traditional craftsmanship and would reconsider their contracts if that changes." I met his gaze steadily. "They're willing to meet with you directly to discuss their concerns." A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face before he masked it with defiance. "Clients adapt. If we offer better pricing and faster delivery, they'll go elsewhere," I finished for him. "Because at that point, we'd be competing with mass manufacturers who already do affordable and fast better than we ever could." I laid out Lucas's documentation of craftsmanship techniques. "This is what we do that others can't. This is why people pay premium prices for Hartwell furniture. Once we lose this, we're just another furniture company with a nice logo." Chase leaned back in his chair, studying me with new awareness. "You've been busy." "I care about this company," I said simply. "Just like you do, though we show it differently." Something in my tone must have reached him, because his defensive posture softened slightly. "What do you want, Emma? To stop me from making any changes at all? To preserve Hartwell exactly as it's always been?" I shook my head. "No. Despite what you might think, I understand that businesses need to evolve. But evolution doesn't mean abandoning your DNA." I pulled out the final piece of my presentation, my proposal for the hybrid model. "I want us to find a middle path, one that respects what makes Hartwell special while exploring new opportunities for growth." For the next hour, I walked Chase through my proposal, explaining how the Hartwell Heritage line could target a new market segment without compromising our reputation for excellence. I showed him Karen's projections comparing the long-term revenue potential of this approach versus his cost-cutting strategy. I emphasized how we could utilize his business expertise in developing this new line while maintaining the traditional craftsmanship for our custom clients. Throughout my presentation, Chase remained largely silent, asking occasional clarifying questions but giving little indication of his thoughts. When I finally finished, he studied the materials spread across his desk, his expression contemplative. "You've put a lot of thought into this," he acknowledged, "because I believe there's a way forward that works for both of us," I replied, "one where your leadership brings positive change rather than disruption." He met my gaze directly. "And if I disagree? If I decide to proceed with my original plan?" The moment of truth had arrived. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "Then I would remind you that major operational changes require board approval, which you don't have. That our craftspeople have indicated they would resign rather than transition to a manufacturing model. That our property lease includes clauses regarding the building's use that would prevent some of the modifications you're planning." I paused. "And that the performance clause in your ownership agreement would convert your shares if the resulting disruption affects profitability as our projections indicate it would." Chase's face darkened. "So it's an ultimatum. Cooperate with your vision or be forced out." "No," I said firmly. "It's an invitation to find common ground instead of brute forcing. Changes that would damage what we're both trying to protect. I'm not asking you to abandon your ideas, Chase. I'm asking you to adapt them to Hartwell's reality instead of trying to bend Hartwell to fit some abstract business model." He stood abruptly, pacing behind his desk. "You and Dad, you think I don't understand this business? That I'm just some MBA with spreadsheets who doesn't appreciate craftsmanship or tradition? That's not—" "It is," he interrupted. "It's exactly what you think. What everyone here thinks. Poor Chase, so desperate to prove himself that he'll destroy his family's legacy in the process." The bitterness in his voice surprised me. "Did it ever occur to you that I might actually care about Hartwell's future? That I might see challenges coming that you're too close to recognize?" I blinked, caught off guard by the genuine emotion beneath his words. "What challenges?" He sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. "The high-end custom furniture market is shrinking, Emma. Younger buyers aren't investing in heirloom pieces the way previous generations did. They move more frequently, change styles more often. The clients who appreciate what we do are literally dying off, and we're not attracting new ones fast enough to replace them." This wasn't something I'd considered deeply. Our current clientele had always seemed stable. Our order books consistently full. But Chase was looking beyond the immediate horizon, seeing demographic shifts I'd been too focused on daily operations to notice. "That's a valid concern," I conceded. "But does the solution have to be abandoning what makes us distinctive? Or could it be finding ways to make that distinctiveness appealing to new generations?" Chase paused his pacing, considering. "Like what?" "Like highlighting the sustainability of furniture that lasts generations instead of ending up in landfills. Like emphasizing the story behind each piece, where the wood comes from, who crafted it, the techniques used. Like creating entry points with smaller pieces that introduce younger buyers to Hartwell quality." I gestured to my proposal. "The heritage line could be part of that strategy, but as a gateway to our core offerings, not a replacement for them." For the first time since he'd returned to Hartwell, I saw genuine consideration in my brother's eyes. Not dismissal, not condescension, but actual engagement with my ideas. "I still think we need more efficient production methods," he said, but his tone had lost its defensiveness. "And I agree," I surprised him by saying, "just not at the expense of quality. Maybe we leverage technology for design visualization, inventory management, or customer acquisition rather than the craftsmanship itself." Chase sat back down, staring at the spread of documents before him. The client letter, the financial projections, the craftsmanship documentation, my proposal. Each piece challenging his assumptions while offering alternate paths forward. "I need time to think about this," he finally said, "to review everything properly." I nodded, sensing that pushing further would only reactivate his defenses. "The announcement is scheduled for tomorrow. Would you consider postponing it until we've had more time to discuss alternative approaches? He hesitated, pride warring with practicality in his expression. Fine, he conceded. I'll postpone, but I'm not committing to anything yet. It wasn't complete victory, but it was an opening, the first real dialogue we'd had since his return. As I gathered my materials to leave, Chase spoke again. "You've changed, Emma," he observed. "You're not the agreeable little sister who used to let me win at board games." I smiled slightly. "I grew up, started recognizing which games are worth winning." As I closed his office door behind me, I felt a curious mixture of hope and caution. The confrontation had gone better than I dared expect, with Chase showing a willingness to listen that I hadn't seen in years. But willingness to listen didn't guarantee change, and postponing his announcement didn't mean abandoning his plans entirely. Dad was waiting in the design room, his attempt at casual observation undermined by the tension in his shoulders. "Well?" he asked as I entered. "He's postponing the announcement," I reported. "And he actually listened, really listened, to the alternative proposal." Relief softened Dad's features. "That's more than I expected, honestly." He raised some valid points about market trends, I admitted, settling into a chair across from him. About younger generations not valuing heirloom furniture the way previous ones did. Dad nodded slowly. Chase has always been good at spotting market shifts. It's one of his genuine talents when he's not blinded by his own ambition. He studied my face. "What are you thinking?" "That maybe there's a middle path here," I said. "One where Chase's business insights and my understanding of craftsmanship could actually complement each other instead of conflict." I hesitated. "If his ego and my stubbornness don't get in the way?" A small smile played across Dad's lips. "The two of you were always more alike than either of you realized. Both passionate, both determined to prove yourselves, just in different arenas." The observation gave me pause. Had I been so focused on our differences that I'd missed our similarities? On the fundamental drive that motivated both of us to fight so hard for our visions of Hartwell's future? What if we both step back? I mused aloud. Give ourselves space to develop a truly collaborative approach, one that draws on both our strengths? Dad leaned forward, interest kindling in his eyes. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm not sure yet," I admitted. "But I think we need to stop seeing this as a zero-sum game. Chase doesn't have to lose for Hartwell to win, and neither do I." The rest of the day passed in an unusual quiet. Chase remained in his office, emerging only briefly for coffee or short conversations with Karen. The workshop continued its normal operations. Craftspeople bent over their tasks with the focused attention that had defined Hartwell for generations. By closing time, I had made my decision. After saying goodnight to the last departing employees, I knocked once more on Chase's door. This time, he called for me to enter immediately. I found him surrounded by papers, my proposal in the center, of his desk with extensive notes scribbled in the margins. He looked tired but engaged, more like the focused student he'd once been than the corporate raider of recent weeks. "I've been thinking," I began without preamble. "That makes two of us," he replied, gesturing to the annotated proposal. "We've been approaching this all wrong," I continued, "treating Hartwell's future as a battleground instead of a shared responsibility." I took a deep breath. What if we took a step back? Both of us. What if we brought in an interim general manager for 6 months, someone neutral with experience in both traditional craftsmanship and business development? Chase's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You'd be willing to do that? To step back from day-to-day operations?" "If you would," I countered. "We'd both remain involved, of course. You focusing on market analysis and growth strategy, me on production quality and client relationships. But the immediate leadership role would be held by someone without our emotional investment. Someone who could objectively evaluate both our visions, Chase said slowly, considering the idea. Exactly. And after 6 months, we'd have data, not just projections. Real-world testing of which approaches work and which don't. I met his gaze. No sabotage, no undermining. A genuine reset to find the best path forward for Hartwell. For a long moment, Chase was silent, turning the proposal over in his mind. When he finally spoke, his voice held none of the defensiveness that had characterized our previous interactions. Who would we bring in? The question itself was a breakthrough, not rejection, not counterattack, but engagement with the possibility. I have some ideas, I said carefully. People with the right background who aren't aligned with either of us. But I'd want your input too. It would need to be someone we both trust. Chase leaned back, studying me with new eyes. You're serious about this? Completely, I confirmed. Because whatever happens, Hartwell needs to continue. Not just as a business, but as what it represents. Craftsmanship, quality, tradition. If stepping back temporarily helps secure that future, it's worth it. A strange expression crossed Chase's face, something between respect and revelation, as if seeing me clearly for the first time in years. Let me think about it, he said, but his tone lacked the dismissive quality it might once have held. This isn't what I expected from you, Emma. I smiled slightly. Maybe that's been our problem all along. We've both been operating on outdated expectations of each other instead of seeing who we've actually become. As I turned to leave, Chase called after me. Whatever happens tomorrow, thank you for caring enough to fight for Hartwell, even against me. The simple acknowledgement meant more than he could know. Recognition, finally, that my dedication to our family's legacy ran just as deep as his, expressed differently, but no less genuine. It's what Hartwells do, I replied. We protect what matters. And for the first time since this struggle began, I felt a flicker of hope that perhaps we might yet find a way to do that together. Friday dawned with a sky full of promise. Early, morning sunlight filtering through Savannah's ancient oaks and casting dappled patterns across the workshop floor. I arrived to find Dad already there, sipping coffee in the showroom as he admired a recently completed dining set. One of my designs, inspired by the clean lines of mid-century craftsmanship, but executed with traditional joinery techniques. You're early, he remarked, though his tone suggested he'd expected nothing less. Couldn't sleep, I admitted, pouring myself coffee from the pot he'd brewed. Too busy thinking about what happens next. Dad nodded thoughtfully. Chase called me last night, said you'd made an interesting proposal. I raised an eyebrow. He called you? First time in months he's initiated a conversation rather than just responding to mine, Dad confirmed with the hint of a smile. He wanted my thoughts on your interim manager idea. My pulse quickened. And what did you tell him? Dad's eyes crinkled at the corners, a subtle sign of approval. That it showed remarkable maturity. From both of you, if he accepts. He set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. I also mentioned that I happen to know someone who might be perfect for the role. You do? This was news to me. Alexandra Valdez used to run operations for Brennan Fine Furniture in Charleston before they were acquired by a conglomerate. Master craftsperson herself, but also has an MBA from Wharton. Been consulting for the past few years, helping traditional craft businesses modernize without losing their soul. He pulled a business card from his pocket and placed it on the table between us. She's respected in both worlds, the artisan, community and business circles. I studied the card, impressed by both the credentials and Dad's foresight. You've had this in your pocket, just waiting for the right moment? He shrugged, the gesture neither confirming nor denying. Let's just say I like to have options available when needed. The workshop began to fill with the familiar sounds of arrival, the back door opening and closing, the hum of lights being switched on, the metallic ring of tools being arranged for the day's work. Lucas appeared in the showroom doorway, his expression questioning. "Any word from your brother?" he asked. "Not yet," I replied, "but Dad thinks—" The front door chimed, the sound somehow more assertive than usual. All three of us turned to see Chase enter, dressed not in his typical business suit, but in dark jeans and a buttoned shirt with rolled sleeves. Attire more appropriate for a workshop than a boardroom. The change wasn't lost on any of us. "Morning," he said, nodding to each of us in turn. "Got time to talk before everyone gets settled?" Dad and Lucas exchanged glances. "I'll get started on the Peterson commission," Lucas said tactfully, retreating toward the workshop. "And I should check in with Diane about some paperwork," Dad added, gathering his coffee cup. He squeezed my shoulder as he passed, a silent gesture of support before leaving Chase and me alone in the showroom. My brother approached slowly, his demeanor lacking the aggressive confidence of recent weeks. He ran a hand over the polished surface of the dining table, appreciating the satin finish that had taken me hours of patient sanding and oiling to achieve. "You made this?" he asked, though he surely knew the answer. "Design and execution," I confirmed. The chairs were a collaboration with Lucas. His joinery techniques for the angles are unmatched. Chase nodded, continuing his inspection. "It's beautiful work. Modern enough for current tastes, but with a solidity that mass-produced pieces lack." The genuine appreciation in his voice surprised me. Chase had never shown much interest in the actual furniture we produced, focusing instead on spreadsheets and market analyses. "I was up most of the night," he said abruptly, turning to face me. "Reviewing your proposal, thinking about what you said yesterday." I waited, giving him space to continue without interruption. "You were right about some things," he admitted, the words clearly difficult for him. "I've been approaching Hartwell as if it were just another business, applying standard MBA strategies without fully understanding what makes it unique." He gestured to the dining set. "Without appreciating that this isn't just inventory, it's craftsmanship that can't be quantified on a balance sheet." The acknowledgement was more than I'd expected, a sign that perhaps he had truly engaged with my concerns, rather than simply calculating his next move in our power struggle. "That doesn't mean changes aren't necessary," he continued, his pragmatic nature reasserting itself. "The market challenges I identified are real, Emma. We can't just continue as we always have and expect to thrive in the coming decades." "I know," I conceded. "And I'm not suggesting we should. Only that we find ways to evolve that preserve what makes Hartwell worth saving in the first place." Chase paced the showroom, collecting his thoughts. "Your idea about an interim manager, it has merit. A neutral perspective could help us separate legitimate business concerns from—" he hesitated, "from family dynamics that might be clouding our judgment." "Dad mentioned he knows someone who might be suitable," I said, retrieving Alexandra Valdez's card from the table. Chase took it, studying the credentials with the sharp assessment I recognized from his Stanford days. "Impressive. Background," he acknowledged. "Spans both worlds. That's what we need, isn't it? Someone who understands both the craft and the business?" He nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about your other suggestion too, the heritage line concept. It has potential, especially if we approach it as a gateway to our custom offerings rather than a replacement." Hope flickered within me, not just for a resolution to our immediate conflict, but for something more meaningful. Genuine collaboration with my brother for the first time in our adult lives. "What are you proposing?" I asked carefully. Chase met my gaze directly. "A truce. Real cooperation instead of competition. I postpone any major changes pending a comprehensive review by someone like Valdez. We both remain actively involved but focused on our areas of expertise. And we commit to finding a sustainable path forward, together." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. Whatever calculations had kept him awake last night had led him to a conclusion I hadn't dared hope for, that we might be stronger working with each other than against each other. "And the announcement scheduled for today?" I pressed. "Cancelled," he confirmed. "Instead, if you agree, we'll announce the engagement of a management consultant to help develop Hartwell's next phase strategy, with input from all stakeholders, including the craftspeople and key clients." Relief washed through me, along with a cautious optimism. "I do agree," I said, "though I have a condition of my own to add." Chase tensed slightly, wariness returning to his expression. "What's that?" "That we make time to understand each other's perspectives properly. You spend some time in the workshop, learning the craft side of the business. I spend some time with you, learning more about market analysis and business strategy." I smiled slightly. "We both have blind spots, Chase. Maybe it's time we helped each other see more clearly." For a moment, I thought he might refuse. Then, to my surprise, he laughed, a genuine sound I hadn't heard from him in years. "The last time you tried to teach me woodworking, I nearly took off a finger with a chisel." The memory surfaced from our teenage years, Chase home for spring break, reluctantly helping me with a school project in Dad's home workshop. His impatience, my frustration, the near accident that had ended the lesson before it really began. "I'll make sure we start with something safer this time," I promised. "Maybe sanding. It's hard to injure yourself with sandpaper." "Don't underestimate my ability to find a way," he quipped, but the humor held no edge. He extended his hand formally. "Do we have an agreement? A fresh start?" I took his hand, feeling the gap between us begin to close. "We do." The company-wide meeting that afternoon had a very different tenor than the one Chase had originally planned. Instead of announcing layoffs and restructuring, we stood together before our assembled team and outlined the collaborative approach we'd developed. "Hartwell is facing real challenges," Chase acknowledged honestly. "But we believe we can address them without sacrificing the craftsmanship and quality that define us. We'll be bringing in an experienced consultant," I added, "to help us develop a strategy that honors our traditions while positioning us for future growth. During this process, we want input from everyone in this room, because Hartwell isn't just a business, it's a community of artisans whose knowledge is our greatest asset." The relief in the room was palpable, tension draining away as our craftspeople realized their skills wouldn't be devalued, their positions eliminated. Lucas caught my eye from the back of the room, giving a subtle nod of approval that meant more to me than any formal recognition. After the meeting, as employees drifted back to their stations with renewed focus, Dad approached Chase and me, pride evident in his expression. "Well done," he said simply. "Both of you." Chase glanced at me, then back to Dad. "We still have a long way to go, a lot of details to work out." "But you're working them out together?" Dad observed. "That's what matters." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box, hand-carved from cherry with our family's initials inlaid in maple. "I've been waiting for the right moment to give you this." I recognized the box immediately. It had sat on Dad's desk for as long as I could remember, a treasured keepsake he'd never allowed anyone to open. Chase clearly recognized it too, his expression softening with childhood memory. Dad placed it in my hands. "Open it," he encouraged. The lid slid open smoothly on hidden wooden runners, revealing a folded piece of aged parchment, and beneath it, 2 identical keys of unusual design. "What is this?" Chase asked as I carefully unfolded the parchment. "A letter from your grandfather to me," Dad explained, given when he transferred leadership of Hartwell to my hands, and keys to the original workshop where he started the business, now our lumber storage building. I scanned the letter, written in our grandfather's distinctive flowing script. "Richard, leadership of a family business is both privilege and burden. You inherit not just a commercial enterprise, but the accumulated hopes, skills, and sacrifices of those who came before. Remember always that Hartwell thrives not through any single person's vision, but through the harmony of tradition and innovation, past and future, held in careful balance. The keys enclosed are duplicates of the original that opened our first workshop door. I give one to you and ask that you preserve the second for when the time comes to share leadership with the next generation. They are a reminder that true security comes not from controlling access, but from ensuring that what lies within is too precious to risk losing. Lead with wisdom, but never alone. With pride and confidence. Your father. I looked up from the letter to find Dad watching us intently. For years, I've kept the second key, wondering which of you would eventually join me in leadership, he said quietly. I realize now that the question was wrong. It was never meant to be one or the other, but both. Complementary strengths creating the balance that Hartwell needs. He took the keys from the box, identical in every detail. One for each of you. Not symbols of control, but of shared responsibility for what lies within. The magnitude of the moment wasn't lost on either Chase or me. This wasn't just a sentimental gesture, but a profound statement of Dad's evolved understanding and his vision for Hartwell's future. Not my leadership or Chase's, but a partnership drawing strength from our different perspectives. Chase accepted his key with uncharacteristic reverence. I haven't always appreciated what you built here, Dad, what you preserved. And I haven't always made space for new ideas, Dad acknowledged. For the innovations needed to keep that legacy alive in changing times. He placed a hand on each of our shoulders. Perhaps that's the lesson in all of this. The future of Hartwell lies not in choosing between tradition and innovation, but in finding the wisdom to embrace both. In the weeks that followed, Alexandra Valdez arrived to begin her tenure as interim general manager. True to her reputation, she brought both deep respect for craftsmanship and sharp business acumen to the role, creating a structured process for evaluating every aspect of Hartwell's operations. Chase and I honored our agreement to learn from each other. Twice weekly, he spent afternoons in the workshop, his initial clumsiness with tools gradually giving way to growing competence as I guided him through the fundamentals of our craft. In return, I joined him for strategy sessions, absorbing lessons in market analysis and financial planning that had previously seemed foreign to my artisan mindset. The most meaningful change, however, was in our relationship itself. The competitive tension that had defined our interactions for so long began to soften, replaced by genuine curiosity about each other's perspectives. We didn't always agree. Our approaches remained fundamentally different, but we found value in those differences rather than seeing them as obstacles. You're developing a decent eye for grain patterns, I remarked one afternoon, watching Chase select boards for a simple side table he was attempting to build himself. His first solo project after weeks of guided practice. And you're getting better at reading profit and loss statements, he countered with a smile. Though you still look like you're translating from ancient Greek when we review the quarterly projections. Progress came in small steps. The heritage line concept evolved through multiple iterations, eventually emerging as a carefully positioned offering that maintained our quality standards while introducing more accessible entry points for new customers. A redesigned website showcased not just our finished pieces, but the processes behind them. Videos of our craftspeople at work, stories of where our materials came from, the history behind specific techniques. Alexandra proved invaluable, her outsider perspective helping us navigate disagreements that might otherwise have rekindled old tensions. 6 months stretched into 9 as we developed a comprehensive strategy that truly integrated Chase's business insights with my commitment to craftsmanship. Dad watched it all with quiet satisfaction, gradually stepping back from daily involvement as it became clear that Chase and I had found a sustainable balance. The property arrangement remained in place. I maintained ownership of Hartwell Heritage Properties while Chase held majority interest in the furniture business. But what had been designed as a check on power had evolved into a structure that encouraged collaboration rather than conflict. 1 year after the confrontation that had nearly torn Hartwell apart, we gathered in the showroom for a different kind of ceremony. The entire staff assembled as Dad officially announced his full retirement, his voice thick with emotion as he expressed confidence in the leadership that would carry his life's work forward. "Hartwell has always been about creating things that endure," he said, looking around at the faces that had become family over decades of shared purpose. Not just furniture, but relationships, traditions, knowledge passed from one generation to the next. His gaze settled on Chase and me, standing together. "I leave knowing that what we've built is in the right hands. Hands that understand both the business of craftsmanship and the craft of business." As employees raised glasses in celebration, Chase leaned closer to me. "He planned this all along, didn't he? The whole arrangement, giving me controlling interest, giving you the property. He knew exactly how it would play out." I smiled, watching. Dad accept congratulations from Lucas and the senior craftspeople. I don't think he knew exactly, but he created conditions that would reveal what mattered most to each of us, and whether we could find our way to putting Hartwell first. Test, Chase mused. "More like an opportunity," I corrected. "To become who we needed to be, not just who we thought we were." Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, I found myself alone in the workshop, running my fingers along a half-completed table in the soft glow of security lights. The familiar sense of wood oil and possibility surrounded me, unchanged despite all the transitions of the past year. Chase found me there, 2 cups of coffee in hand. He offered one silently, then leaned against the workbench beside me. "What happens next?" he asked after a comfortable silence. I considered the question, understanding it went beyond immediate. Business plans to the heart of what we'd been building together, a partnership neither of us had imagined possible a year ago. "We keep finding the balance," I said finally, "between what you see and what I see, between preserving what matters and creating what's needed." I smiled at my brother, this familiar stranger I was finally coming to know. Dad's backup plan worked better than he could have hoped, not because either of us won, but because we both did. Chase nodded thoughtfully, then raised his coffee cup in a small toast. "To Dad's backup plan, and to what we build next." As we stood in the quiet workshop, surrounded by the legacy we'd nearly lost and the future we were crafting together, I felt a sense of completion. Not an ending, but the closing of one chapter and the opening of another. Whatever challenges awaited Hartwell in the years ahead, we would face them not as rivals, but as partners. Our different strengths creating the resilience our family's legacy deserved. The keys Dad had given us rested in our pockets, identical yet distinct, like the contributions we each brought to Hartwell's future. Not symbols of ownership or control, but reminders of the precious trust we now held together. A business, a tradition, a family restored. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.